Okay. Okay. Okay, okay. Okay.
Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
John Lennox.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that warm welcome. I understand I now stand on the sacred ground of the Tar Heels. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be invited to this famous and distinguished university. And I have enjoyed enormously over the past years getting to know many students and professors in North America. And you encourage me to see so many of you come to hear a talk on the question, God, fact or fiction. And I presume you mean by the title the question as to whether there's any objective reality to God, or whether the concept of God is, just as was suggested in the film, a construct of our human minds. And I suppose that's probably the best place to start, with Sigmund Freud, who suggested that.
What up?
That God, the idea of God is a wish fulfillment.
Oh, Blitz is back.
In order to compensate us for the miseries of this life.
Dude, I know, it was like 3 days.
When you die.
I couldn't,
It's very interesting when you analyze that kind of argument, because it actually works both ways.
Yeah, we'll get on it right now, dude.
There is a book called Eine kleine Geschichte des Größten, a brief history of the great one, written by Germany's most distinguished psychiatrist, Manfred Lutz. And in that he says, if there is no God, then of course Freud gives you a brilliant argument why religion and God are a
I'm going to play it right now.
If there is no God.
I haven't played it.
But then he goes on to point out that if there is a God,
I've been playing the no
Freud
build
will give you an
royal
equally
victories.
convincing argument why
I
atheism
only got
is a
one
wish
royal victory on
fulfillment.
that. It's hard.
The desire not to meet God. As Czesław Miłosz, the Nobel Prize winning
Oh, we're on, bro.
Pole Prize winner for literature, pointed out
You like my guy?
that atheism for him was the opium of the people, satisfying the desire
got Flanders,
never
baby.
to have to face God and to give account for our lives. So Manfred Lutz says the argument is equal in both directions at that level, and that psychiatry, neither Freud nor Jung nor Frankl, can help you with the question whether there is a God or not. And so when Richard Dawkins wrote the book, The God Delusion, I think it's important to realize that we've got to look at the evidence. And what I want to do is to present to you some of the evidence that has helped me on my pathway. Indeed, you may regard me as a prize candidate for delusion, because I come from Northern Ireland, which has
this is all I eat right
always
here.
the best reputation
Look at
for its brand of Christianity.
Freaking good.
And when I arrived at Cambridge somewhere in the middle of last century, one of the first students I met started up a little conversation
Freaking
with
good,
me.
dude.
He said,
Freaking good.
Tell me, do you believe in God? And then he said, oh, sorry, that's the last question I should have asked you. All you Irish believe in God and you fight about it. Now, I'd heard that before.
All right, let's go.
But it struck me.
New
My
map on
parents
Blitz.
were believers in God, so were their parents. So obviously it's something to do with Irish genetics and the Irish psyche. So of course I believed in God. So what I decided to do on that day, many, many years ago, was to get to know people who did not share my worldview. And I've been doing it ever since. As a result of that quest, that interest in truth,
Who's with you at the
I
shop?
was German. I spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe during the Cold War, mixing with people that had been systematically exposed to atheism in their schools and universities. And then, having been a Russian translator most of my life, when the wall fell, I went to Russia, to Siberia, on a two-way ticket, mind you. But I got to Siberia and was involved in discussions in the Academy of Sciences with people who, for 75 years, had known nothing but the atheistic interpretation of the universe. I
We're
did
going
that,
in
ladies
hot,
and
bro.
gentlemen, because I'm interested in truth. The motto of your university is Lux et Libertas, light and freedom. And I was very fortunate when I was young in that my parents gave me light, but they gave me something very important. They gave me freedom to think. It is an unusual thing to come, as I do, from a sectarian country and have parents who are Christian without being sectarian. It's
Where are
even
you?
more unusual
Oh, I see you.
to have parents that allow you to think and stimulate your imagination. And so those two words, lux and libertas, are very important to me.
What
Indeed,
are they
I go
doing?
to a
They're just trying to-
university of which you may have heard, somewhere away there in England, and its motto is Dominus illuminatio mea, the Lord is my light. Now, it's very interesting this, you see, because both of our mottos, they're very similar. They come actually from the Christian tradition. So the people that founded your university and the people that founded my university did not see any conflict between believing in God and being involved at the highest and deepest level in intellectual activity. History is enormously important. And of course, as a scientist, I find it highly ironical that people pit God against science so much in the contemporary world. Because one of the first arguments I want to advance tonight is this, that modern science as we know it arose in a Christian context, in a monotheistic context. Merton, or Whitehead's thesis as it's known, best stated in the form in which C.S. Lewis put it. Men became scientific. Why?
Oh my
because
gosh,
they respected
we're
law and
racking 'em,
nature.
bro.
Why? Because they believed in a lawgiver.
Done.
And it is not an accident that Galileo and Newton and Kepler and Clerk Maxwell and so on were all believers in God. Ladies and gentlemen, we forget very easily that far from belief in God hindering science, it was the very motor that drove it.
Later, dude.
So the negative
loser.
of that is important because, as Richard Dawkins said to me once in a debate, that isn't a big deal because everybody believed in God in those days. And so if science is going to rise at all, then it's likely to arise in that kind of background. But that's not quite the whole story, because Joseph Needham, who was a chemist, a brilliant chemist at Oxford and a sinologist, an expert in China and Chinese, wrote the definitive history of technology and science in China. He was a Marxist, and he tried for many years to fit the lack of rise of modern science in China. They had technology, they had printing, they had fireworks and all sorts of things. But the notion of science as an abstract study with mathematics investigating the universe didn't happen. And he came to the following conclusion. He ended up not being able to fit it into Marxist principles. And he said the reason science did not rise in China in the way it did in the West is the fact that the Chinese lacked the unifying concept of a creator. So far from being embarrassed by being a Christian, believing that God is real and not fiction, and a scientist, it's exactly the other way round in my case, because it is the Christian faith that arguably gave me my subject. Now, of course, you will object to that and say, but that doesn't really go to the question whether science has made Christianity obsolete. Surely science is the source of all the really big answers. Look at the success, say, of the Human Genome Project and so on. Well, I'm passionate about science. And science has given us many important answers to the questions that science can answer. But I don't think you at this university believe that science answers every question.
She got
Otherwise
me.
you'd have to shut half your faculties. History would go, economics would go, philosophy would go, literature would go. And I don't think you want that. But it's important to realize that the success of
Dude,
science is partly
thank God Blitz
because
is back.
of the grid of its questions, the mesh of the net that it applies to catch the kind of knowledge that it itself gains. Science doesn't answer questions of ethics, for instance. Einstein once said, you can speak about the ethical foundations of science, but you cannot speak about the scientific foundations of ethics. Nor does science deal with the question of meaning. And that's why some people who've put all their money on science are confused about the meaning of life. Because science doesn't really go there. Indeed, recent research in psychiatry is absolutely fascinating. I listened in London just recently to Ian McGilchrist describing the results of a lifetime's work on the two halves of the brain. And his analysis goes like this, and it's being picked up by philosophers all around the world at the moment. You probably know the rudiments of it already. The left side of the brain is analytical. It's the scientific side. It's reductionistic. It analyzes, it measures, it counts. But there's a right-hand side to the brain. And the right-hand side of the brain integrates. It wants to see the big picture. It's interested in persons rather than things. And McGilchrist's thesis is this. He says, since the Enlightenment, we've focused on the left side of the brain. But because we've got a right side to our brain, we've got utterly confused. Because the left side, with its scientific analyses, is not giving us either transcendence or meaning. Now, I find that fascinating because that's something that's actually flowing out of science. And he's arguing, as he takes us on a fascinating journey through the history of Western philosophy, he's arguing that we need to get back to those bigger pictures, the meta-narratives, the worldviews that give meaning, that integrate. And all of us in this room tonight and in the overflow, we all have a worldview. We've got our answers, not maybe completely formed. Our answers to the big questions of life. What is ultimate reality? What happens after death? What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? And so on. We've all got a worldview. And it's important as we enter into this question, God, fact, or fiction, that we put it within a big picture so that we can see where we're all coming from. And it's simple, really.
What the heck just happened right now,
you go
dude?
back to the
He was
ancient
doing moves I
Greeks,
never
you'll
did
find,
before.
as they looked at one of the fundamental worldview questions,
You got
and it
the
says, what is
moves like
ultimate
Jagger.
reality?
You got the moves
And
like
some people
Jagger.
took the
You
view
got
that
the
this universe
moves like
is ultimate
Flander. You
reality.
got
Now
the
they just
moves
changed
like
universe
Flander.
to multiverse. It is ultimate reality. Mass energy is all essentially that exists. Now see what follows from that. If you believe that, you are a materialist or a naturalist, and therefore your notion of what it means to explain things is bottom up. Because mass energy is all that exists, so you have to explain everything. The universe, you, your consciousness, your life, and you, bottom up. Now that worldview was popularized
got
by
the
Democritus
moves like
and
Fernanda.
Leucippus and comes up to us through the centuries. But at the same time,
You
there was
got
another
the
worldview
moves like
espoused
Fernanda.
by Socrates, my intellectual hero, Plato, and Aristotle, and so on. And they said, no, mass energy isn't all that exists. There's something more. There's transcendence. There are the gods, or there is God. And so in the contemporary
Hey, what up, Remy?
we've got these two worldviews
good to
that
see you, man.
collide
Good to
together.
been
They
good,
are,
been
of
good.
course, diametrically opposed. Now the interesting
I'm playing
thing
the
is this,
new
when we
Blitz
ask the question, God,
on
fact, or
Fortnite. It's
fiction,
freaking
what we're really
fun, bro.
asking is this: if you attack that,
I've never
question,
played this game,
what
but recently
tools
I've
have
been
you got
stuck
to
on
answer
it.
the question? And one of our tools is, of course, science and philosophy and
What's going
our
on? What's new?
experience. And what complicates the whole process these days is the fact that people like Stephen Hawking and Lawrence Krauss more recently, and Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, they tend to present to us a choice between science and God. Now, when you think about that for a moment, that raises in my
heck? I
mind
can't kill
two
this
different
Superman?
things. Firstly, it shows they're confused about God. What do I mean by that?
I guess
Well, when you analyze
Superman
what
couldn't
many of
handle
these people mean by God,
Flanders,
it's not what
dude.
I mean by God, or what most people mean by God. They mean a God of the gaps, that God is a fiction invented to fill gaps that science or other intellectual activity has not yet filled. So as knowledge increases, God disappears. If you believe in a God of the gaps, by definition, you have to choose between God and science, because
What'd
the
you
more
think? You're gonna
God,
get
the
away,
less
dude?
science, the more science, the less God. The God of the gaps philosophy is summed up in
Sorry.
these words: I can't explain it, therefore God did it. Now, that is not the view of any of the three great monotheistic religions, certainly not of the Christian faith. Because I believe that God is not a God of the gaps, he's the God of the whole show.
Woo,
He's the
dude.
God of the bits we understand.
Man, that's
He's the
sick.
God of the
Remy,
bits
what are
we
you
don't
playing right
understand.
now?
We can illustrate that
Give me some,
historically. When Newton discovered his law of gravitation,
Give
he
me
didn't
some
say,
tips,
"Look, I've
bro."
got a law, I don't need God. No, he didn't. He wrote the most brilliant book in the history of science, Principia Mathematica, arguing, hoping that an intelligent person would see that it would lead them to believe in an intelligent God. In other words, the more he understood of the universe out there, the more he admired the genius of the God that had done it that way. And a moment's thought shows you that life is like that. The more you understand about art, the more you can see the genius of a Rembrandt or a Picasso. The more you understand about engineering, the more you can admire the genius of a Rolls or a Royce or a Whittle. It's not the other way round. So this idea of pitching God against science comes from a totally inadequate view of God, but it comes from somewhere else. And it's this: choosing between God and science is like choosing between Frank Whittle and science as an explanation for the jet engine. You'd never dream of doing that. Because in order to explain a jet engine, you need several things. You need a
Frank, I'm on a
scientific
rampage,
explanation
bro.
in terms of law of turbojet
I can't be stopped.
turbojet generation, and also of mechanical engineering. That's the science explanation. But you also need an agent explanation in terms of the man who designed the jet engine. You need both.
Oh.
Now, it's as
Damn, that
silly
sucks.
to say
Right when
that
I
because
right when I
we've got
said that,
scientific
look what happened.
explanations of bits of the universe, that rules out God as a fiction. It's as silly to say, aha, I understand how a Ford motor car works. I think Henry Ford is a fiction. It's exactly the same argument. And yet so many people fall for it. This business of explanation is something that's worth doing a little bit of research into, ladies and gentlemen. Because there's another thing I want to say. Do you think that when we get a law of gravity, we know what gravity is? We don't, you know. Wittgenstein, the famous philosopher, pointed out the greatest deception of modernism is to think that the laws of nature are explanations. Newton was clever enough to see that his law of gravity didn't explain what gravity was. Nobody knows what it is. And if you don't believe me, read Richard Feynman, one of the most distinguished American
Trails of the Sky.
physicists that ever
All right, I'm going to download it for you. Do you
see,
think I'll
even
enjoy it?
Science itself is limited. What does it mean to explain? The point I'm making is that God is not a fiction invented to explain where science cannot explain. God is the one who created the universe and is the reason why science itself can be done. And we'll come to that in a little while. So I want to make clear also that the big issue facing us is not science versus religion. That ought to be clear to you. I mentioned the Human Genome Project a moment ago. Its first director was Jim Watson, who won the Nobel Prize. Its second director was Francis Collins, now the director of the National Institute of Health.
Yes,
Watson's an atheist. Collins is a Christian. I've met both of them and discussed this with them. What divides them is not their science.
RPGs, it's
They're
an old
both
game. All right.
top-level scientists.
I'm not going to download
What
it anymore,
divides
dude.
them is their
Sorry.
worldview. One is an atheist, and the other is a theist, a Christian.
I was gonna
So
do it
what
for
I'd
you,
like to
but
get across tonight
right when you
is
said
this.
that, I had
When
to
we're facing the
just be
question
real with
on the
myself.
table, we're
There's
really
no way I'm gonna-
asking, what is the evidence for one worldview or the other? Now, there's so much argument today from the side of the new atheists. And as you heard in the introduction, I've debated most of them. And it's been a very interesting experience. And the result of those debates has been that I concentrate, as I've just done, on some of the arguments that I think are very important in clearing the fog away so that we can see what it is we are really talking about. Now, the next question is this: how do we decide whether God is a fiction or not? Well, the first thing to do is to realize that it is a matter of evidence. Well, some people say, is it really? I thought science was facts, and you religious people, you believe in faith.
Got him.
Well, that is totally wrong. You see, I wouldn't
The
stand
remake,
here for a moment, ladies and gentlemen, if I did not believe that there was
I don't know. Maybe I
evidence
should
for
just
my
try it. I
faith.
shouldn't be so
But
anti-RPG,
because there
right?
has been a redefinition of faith in the last 10 years, I better explain to you what
I just
is
like
going
quick
on.
action, you know?
If you look up Webster's
In and out,
dictionary,
just
it's
quick.
distinct from the Oxford
I don't know how to
English
sit
Dictionary,
there.
You'll find a new entry under faith. Faith, noun, believing where there's no evidence.
Oh, jetpack.
The Oxford English Dictionary hasn't got there yet, but many people in England have got there.
Ooh.
That is not the definition of faith. Faith, fides in Latin, means trust, belief, and always has the idea of raising the question, what is the evidence on which your trust
All right, if I
rests?
get the royal victory on this match, I'll
If I
download it.
asked you, were the Tar Heels going to win all their games this season? I might then ask you, what's the evidence of it? And I think you'd be very quick to give me an awful lot, wouldn't you? Of course you would, because all of you understand what evidence-based trust means. Every one of us do. The financial crisis proves it. We thought we could trust the bankers, or at least some of them, and they let us down. The whole market froze because there wasn't, as you economists
Sorry,
know,
Remy.
enough grounds for trust. So the evidence had
That
to
was
be
the final
built up.
three right
There's
there,
not a
too.
person in the West these days that doesn't know what evidence-based trust means. But unfortunately, the new atheists led by Richard Dawkins have come along and they've said, look, faith is a religious word and it means believing where there's no evidence. So if you meet somebody like me, Professor Lennox, he's a man of faith. That's not a compliment, that's an insult. It means Lennox believes where there's no evidence, so there's no point in talking to him. Now, I cannot speak for other faiths tonight. They must rightly speak for themselves. But it must be something that we emphasize, that the Christian faith is evidence-based. That is seen in many places in the New Testament. But one in particular, there are four Gospels. The fourth one, the Gospel of John, ends with these words. Many other things Jesus did in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written in order that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life in his name. Many things he did, not written. These are written in order that you might believe. That is that
Remy, thanks.
is
I'll get one.
based on evidence. The next step that's very important is to realize that faith is an essential ingredient in science. Albert Einstein said that I cannot imagine a scientist without that faith. What faith? Well, not faith in God, but faith in the rational intelligibility of the universe. You see, I'm a scientist. I believe, I have faith.
But do you have any
I
good
have
games that are like
confidence in the fact
just
that
like
science
quick
can be done.
action?
That's part of my
you know,
credo. But what
like this
justifies that
style.
faith?
I don't know.
I mean, is it
I like
not
the side-to-side
astonishing
scroll
that a
games.
mathematician thinking with her head in here can come up with equations?
Like
that
they have that new
describe the
Terminator
universe
coming
like
out.
that?
It's like
That
2D.
prompted Eugene
That looks
Wigner, who won
good,
the
dude.
Nobel Prize for Physics, to say that mathematics is unreasonably effective. How does it work? Why do scientists trust in the rational intelligibility of the universe? Now, this is something that has been
I
put
hate that gun.
under quite a bit of scrutiny in recent days. Because, you know, Charles Darwin wrote very many interesting things, but one of them was this: "With me the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind?" Our topic is God, fact or fiction. But let's have a look. Is science fact or fiction? Well, you say, what do you mean? Well, let me think it out with you. I am a scientist who trusts my mind to access the universe out there. On what basis? Well, when I
He
talk
says,
to my
is
atheist friends in
science
Oxford, and I have
fact
many
or
of them, and
fiction?
I talk to them all the time.
I like
I ask
this.
them, tell me, what is the mind? Well, they say the mind is the brain. They are reductionist. And what's the brain? Well, the brain is the end product of a mindless, unguided process, a natural process that gets us from primitive chemicals to consciousness. Oh, I see. That's very interesting. Why do you trust it then? This is Darwin's doubt. You see, if you go to your desk tomorrow morning and you have a look at your computer and you knew it was the end product of a mindless, unguided process, would you use it? Of course you wouldn't. You wouldn't trust it for a moment. Now, this is what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen. Is science fact or fiction? If it is generated by an instrument that is
Recently
the end
played
product of a
Mega Bunk,
mindless,
and alright, that
unguided
sounds like a
process,
fun
that
name,
sounds
Mega
pretty
Bunk.
like a big fiction to
That's
me,
like,
except we wouldn't know what fiction or any words meant if that were true. Because rationality dissolves.
It's like a rock
as is
band from
increasingly
Europe.
seen. Read,
Mega
for
Bunk.
instance, the book by Thomas Nagel that's just come out last week.
We are a
And
death
Thomas
band from
Nagel is a leading
Europe.
American philosopher and an
And we like
atheist.
to
It's called Mind
slay.
and Cosmos. And he's pointing out what has been pointed out over several years, that there's a massive problem with the naturalistic interpretation of the universe because it reduces thought to the firing of synapses. It's like you saying this painting is nothing but molecules of paint and canvas. That's the end of meaning. So the title becomes a very interesting one. We started with God, fact or fiction, but now I'm saying this. If you remove God, you end up with science being a fiction. One of Germany's leading philosophers is Robert Spemann, and he said if you exit God, you exit any concept of access to truth, even via science. So you see, what I'm doing is what I did at the very beginning with the Freud argument. I'm applying it in two directions. Now, from where I sit as a Christian, the rational intelligibility of the universe fits beautifully with what Christianity
Dang,
teaches.
dude.
Because what it teaches is that the very same
Yeah, the
God
new Call of Duty, I
is
didn't like it.
responsible for the
I
universe
played it
out
in,
there
I
as
just
is
said
ultimately
whatever. I
responsible
like, this
for
is,
the human mind in
it's
here.
fun,
That
it's
at
cool,
least
but I can't
has
keep
the
up with
benefit of making some sense.
the
So
players,
we move
dude. I'm
on
like
from
going in there and
there
just
because
dying every time.
Many questions now flood
I wanna
in.
feel like a
People
winner.
Say, but just a minute.
That's why this game,
All
it's
this
simpler.
talk about science
Maybe
and God is okay, but you know, you Christians have another thing that you claim to
I couldn't
believe
get,
in.
dude. I couldn't get
You
any
claim
like.
to believe in
It was just hard. I didn't want to
revelation.
get further
You believe in
into
holy
investing
books, and surely there's
without,
an example,
you know,
if
feeling
ever there was
good
one,
about playing.
of faith being
This
opposed
game,
to rationality,
it makes me
reason,
feel
and
good
science.
because I
No,
win
it isn't.
sometimes, but
Not at all. I do, I confess to you, without any embarrassment, I do believe
I
that
mean,
Scripture, the Bible, is a
I
revelation.
want to get the
from
new
God.
Marvel
But
tokens
then
when it
it
comes
seems
out.
to me
Once
that
that's
is
ready, I'm
fits
gonna
with
just
my
literally
other
play that
experience.
for
If there is a God,
probably
ladies and
like
gentlemen,
a year.
He's hardly likely to be
Just
less
straight.
than we are.
I'm gonna
He's likely to
dedicate
be a
on
great deal
becoming
more than we are.
a
And
sick
if there is a God
token
who's a
player.
personal God, then the notion that he has revealed himself
And if it's
is a
like Dragon
notion
Ball
that
Fighter
lies
Z,
very readily to hand.
I'll have like
And
some
you will be aware that the
some
central
muscle
claim of
memory, because I
Christianity
played
is
that for
God
years and got good at it.
became human. He revealed himself in human form.
But that's what I'm waiting for, dude.
But revelation, let's start at this level. Revelation is not opposed to reason. If you want to get to know me and I remain silent, you'll never get to know me, even if you put me under a scanning, tunneling microscope and attach electroencephalographic equipment to my brain. You'll never get to know me. But you will get to know me if I reveal myself to you. That is, if I start speaking. Now tell me, when I start speaking to reveal myself to you, do you switch your brain off? Of course
You
not.
gotta be a bot
You need
to
your
walk
brain,
like
your
that,
mind,
dude.
to understand what I'm saying. So what I claim, ladies and gentlemen, is this, that there are different sources of information for us. There is nature. We study it with great fascination. There is literature. There is art. There is music. But there's also revelation, at least something that claims to be revelation. We use our minds on all of them. I haven't yet met anybody that can read the Bible without using a mind. So it is absurd to suggest that revelation
yes, this is what I
and
want.
reason are
The dual shotgun,
opposed.
dude. That's my favorite
But
weapon on this game.
I know, because I can hear it, what will come into this immediately. It's the notion, but look, revelation means that there's a supernature. And surely we realize, have you been asleep for the last 3 centuries? Don't you realize that David Hume, the Scottish Enlightenment philosopher, has proved that miracles are impossible? So it's stupid talking to us in this distinguished university about the supernatural and the miracles. Who do you think we are? Well, that's what I got in the Charlie Rose show 2 or 3 weeks ago. You've probably heard of Charlie Rose, have you? Well, I was flown over to New York to meet Richard Dawkins on the Charlie Rose show. And Richard Dawkins started this little discussion that lasted a whole hour by saying this. He said, of course, I've met John Lennox, and John Lennox, believe it or not, he actually believes that Jesus walked on water. Wow. In other words, to say that he's an
we're
absolute
killing
idiot
him.
and should not be a professor at Oxford. My response was, Richard, I said, if Jesus was who he claimed to be, the Word of God incarnate, the one that created the universe and therefore invented
How am I missing this
walking
guy, dude?
isn't a big deal.
That's bullshit.
Your problem is this.
I'm trying not to curse.
You have an a priori rejection of the supernatural. That's what we need to talk about. We don't start with the miracles of Jesus. Because if you reject the supernatural a priori, of course you reject them and think I'm idiotic. But there are, in principle, questions to ask before we get that far. So I proceeded. And it's interesting because this happened with Christopher Hitchens in one of my debates. He brought up David Hume. David Hume says miracles are violations of the laws of nature. And therefore, since we know the laws of nature, people in the biblical times were crude and pre-scientific. They could believe in miracles. That is impossible to us. Well, both wrong. First of all, why was it that when Jesus rose from the dead, it was recognized as a miracle? Because people knew the law that dead bodies stay dead. They weren't that primitive. Why was it that Joseph, when Mary told him she was pregnant, didn't believe her story about the Holy Spirit? Was that because he didn't know where babies come from? No, it was because he knew where they came from. Do you see, the people then knew those laws of nature because, think about it for a second, if you don't know the regularities, you couldn't recognize something that appears to be an exception, could you? So that's the first question dealt with. The second one is much more serious. Are miracles violations of the laws of nature? Now, I'm staying in a hotel tonight. I'll not name it. But I'm staying in a hotel. Now, imagine tonight I put $100 in the drawer by my bed. And tomorrow night I
Straight
put
up in
another
the
$100.
face.
So the 100 plus 100 is 200. Even in Chapel Hill, yes? You're not,
Goodness.
You're not totally postmodern. You believe in some truth, okay? So 100 plus 100 equals 200. So I stay another night. I go into the drawer and I find $50. So what do I say? Do I say A, the laws of arithmetic have been broken, or do I say B, the laws of North Carolina have been broken? Well, you know the answer, don't you? But isn't that very interesting? How do you know the laws of North Carolina have been broken? How do you know a thief has put his hand in? You know it because you know the laws of arithmetic. That's why you laughed. If somebody was sitting
I
here,
love
you
this
know
guy,
arithmetic,
John
you
Lennox,
said,
bro.
well, 100 plus 100 is
Listen
200.
to what he's breaking
Yesterday,
down.
And today it's 50. Well, that's very interesting. So what? Now let's look at that a bit more carefully. What are these laws? They're descriptions of what normally happens. The laws of Newton will describe how a snooker ball moves on a table. They won't cause it to move. Do you know the laws of Newton never caused a snooker ball to move in the whole history of the universe? Laws are not causes, they're descriptions of what normally happens. Now, God, who invented the universe with its regularity, of course, can feed a new event in. The laws take over. So when God encoded himself into humanity in Jesus Christ at that conception, 9 months later, according to what you learn in med school here, 9 months later a baby was born. The laws took over. The miracle occurred at the beginning. But you see, and this is so important, miracles don't violate any laws. The laws describe what normally happens, but the God that invented the universe and created its regularities can feed a new event in, just as much as Newton's laws will describe the billiard ball going across the table, but if I lean over the table and pick the ball up as it goes across, I'm not breaking Newton's laws, because I am entering into that system which isn't closed with a new energy. Do you see what's going on here? And God does exactly the same thing. You see, Christians are not claiming that Christ rose from the dead by some natural process going on in the grave 5 minutes before he rose. That would be breaking the laws, the law that dead bodies remain dead. What they are claiming is that God injected his power and raised him from the dead as powerful evidence that he is who he claimed to be. So it seems to me that arguing that miracles violate the laws of nature is just false. And incidentally, one of the greatest supporters of David Hume was the late Anthony Flew. He, in fact, was the world's most famous atheist before Richard Dawkins. And not long before he died, I had an opportunity to spend a couple of hours chatting to him. And I took the liberty of asking him about his books on Hume, and he said, I was wrong about Hume. My books would all have to be rewritten. Because Anthony Flew came to believe in God. He became a deist, not a Christian.
Are you
he came
kidding
to
me,
believe
dude?
in God. And the interesting thing is, the springboard
Freaking suck
of his
at this.
belief was the nature of the complexity of human DNA. Now, this is very interesting. He said to me explicitly, but it's written elsewhere, that he was simply wrong in thinking that Hume had actually given the final solution to the problem of miracles. He had done no such thing. This universe, ladies and gentlemen, according to the materialists, is a closed system. I think the evidence goes to show it's an open system. And that there is a God who has left his fingerprints within space and time. Now, often when I talk about this kind of thing, all kinds of objections come, and one of them is, look, isn't there an aspect of your faith that is, well, it's pretty weak stuff, you know. You talk about God being 3 in 1, and you talk about there being a creator. But look, if you're going to say that God created the universe, well, you're going to logically ask who created the creator. That question appeared twice on the board outside, didn't it? Richard Dawkins centers his whole book, The God Delusion, around that question. So let's have a look at it for a minute, because I find in universities around the world it creates a problem. The first thing is the incomprehensibility of Christianity, and the second, who created the creator. But it's easier for me to look at them the other way round. So let's take the who created the creator first. I hope it's not too late at night for logic. I love logic. And I hope you love logic. So, who or what created X? What do those words mean? And what do they presuppose? What created X presupposes that X was created, yes? In the asking of the question, there's a closing down on the possible answers, often to make the real answer look absurd.
Good God.
Because you don't realize that the question limits the answer. Who created God assumes God's created. Now, you'll have noticed that what the title of Richard Dawkins' book is not. It's not the created God's delusion. Because we don't need him to tell us that created gods are a delusion. We usually call them idols. You see, he is assuming that God is created. But what if God isn't created? As Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all very strongly affirm that God is eternal. The question bypasses it completely. But there's a sting, as I pointed out to Dawkins. I said, you think it's a valid question about my God. Of course it isn't, because the God revealed in Scripture is eternal. In the beginning, the Word was God. In the beginning was the Word was God. That is, already was. He is eternal. All things came to be through him. And at that point, John is pointing out to the great Greek question. Are there eternal things, or did everything come to exist? And the claim of John is this: God is eternal. He never came to be. The rest of the universe came to be. Okay? So I said to Richard, let's turn the question round. You believe the universe created you. You also believe this is a valid question, so let me put it to you. Who created your creator? I'm still waiting for the answer. You see, it works both ways. So this question that he regards as a knockdown question that ends God completely is no such thing. The second one was about the incomprehensibility of God.
I didn't know you could roll away like
Father,
that.
Son, and Holy Spirit. Now, I can't give you a lecture on that. I'll tell you a story.
That was pretty fun.
I once addressed a room as full as this of physicists, all engaged in research on atomic weapons and atomic physics. And after I'd finished, a professor from Oxford came up to me and he said, well, he said, Dr. Lennox, that was a very interesting talk, you know, about science and religion, but I detect that you're a Christian. He was pretty sharp, you see. I detect you're a Christian. And he said, now come off it. I mean to say, Christianity's absurd. All this wonderful philosophy recognizing God in the design of the universe, I can see there's something in that.
Check out the...
I'm surprised at
That's
you.
a custom-made...
Because you see, aren't you obliged to believe
picture.
Jesus is both human and God at the same time?
My nephew drew that little guy right there.
He said, can you explain that to me? And I said, well, why not? But I said, before I do, let me ask you something simpler. He said, that's fine, that's fair. I've asked you a question, you asked me one. So I said to him, what is consciousness?
Yeah, buddy. There we go.
He said, I don't know. Oh, I said, that's all right. Let's try something easier. What is energy? Well, we can measure it and we can use it. I said, what is it? A longer pause. I don't know. Oh, I said, that's very interesting. Tell me, do you believe in consciousness? Yes, he said, I do. And do you believe in energy? Yes, he said, I do. And you don't know what either of them are. Should I write you off as a physicist? He said, please don't. But I said, you were about to write me off as an intellectual, because I couldn't explain to you how Jesus is simultaneously God and man. I said, look, we don't even know what light is, gravity is, energy is. We realize that light sometimes looks like particles, sometimes look like waves. We've got models to cope with it. But I said, why is it you believe in these things when you don't know what they are? And being a kind Irishman, I helped him out of it. And I said, I think you believe in them because of the explanatory power of the concepts. He said, that's right. Well, I said, that's exactly why I believe that Jesus is both God and human. Because it's the only explanation that makes sense of the data.
That's
There
amazing.
is mystery.
How he's tying
But
down the
ladies and
existence of
gentlemen, the
God
mystery
to
is spread.
the reason we believe in gravity
There is
and light.
mystery in my Christian faith, marvelous
Love.
mystery. And there's mystery
It's
in
like,
science.
you don't
and
know
I'm
what
trying to
gravity
explore
is.
both.
We recognize it, but what
We
is it?
mustn't come off with the idea that the only incomprehensible things are in, say, the
So you
Christian
can't
faith.
write off somebody that
If
believes
there
in
is a
God.
God, he's going to be a lot more complex than we might imagine. Toy cars aren't complex, but they're boring. You'd rather have a real Porsche or a real NASCAR, and that's much more complicated, isn't it? Oh, says Richard Dawkins, but there's the next problem, you see. You Christians are hopeless because you bring in God as an explanation. Okay, let's just talk about that matter of complexity. Isn't your God absolutely useless as an explanation because he's more complex than the thing you're explaining? That's no explanation.
Damn,
Because
dude.
explanation by definition runs from the simple to the complex.
Son of a gun.
So Richard Dawkins put that to me in a debate, and I said to him, well, that's a very interesting objection, Richard. You know, I read a book not long ago called The God Delusion. And it's about 400 pages long. There is mystery in my Christian faith, marvelous mystery. And there's mystery in science, and I'm trying to explore both. We mustn't come off with the idea that the only incomprehensible things are in, say, the Christian faith. If there is a God, he's going to be a lot more complex than we might imagine. Toy cars aren't complex, but they're boring. You'd rather have a real Porsche or a real NASCAR, and that's much more complicated, isn't it? Oh, says Richard Dawkins, but there's the next problem, you see. You Christians are hopeless because you bring in God as an explanation. Okay, let's just talk about that matter of complexity. Isn't your God absolutely useless as an explanation because he's more complex than the thing you're explaining? That's no explanation. Because explanation by definition runs from the simple to the complex. Does it? So Richard Dawkins put that to me in a debate. And I said to him, well, that's a very interesting objection,
Dang,
Richard.
that
You know,
was
I read a book
lame
not
right
long
there,
ago
bro.
called The God Delusion. And it's about 400 pages long. It's pretty complex. So I thought I would ask myself the question what its origin was. And then I discovered to my amazement that its origin was in the much more complex mind of Richard Dawkins. So I completely dismissed that because it was no explanation. Because the mind of Richard Dawkins is more complex than the thing I'm trying to explain. It's a rather foolish argument, isn't it? And ladies and gentlemen, where do we get the idea from? That explanation always goes from the simple to the complex. It's wonderful when we can explain complex things in terms of simple. But there's one area where we never do it. And that one area is in the field of semiotics and language. The moment you saw the words, "Is God real?" come up there, you recognized them, didn't you? Now let me tell you a little story to explain this. We have lovely dinners in my college. I'm sorry I can't invite you to one of them, but there we are. And one night I was having dinner with a biochemist, brilliant biochemist. And when he discovered I was a mathematician, he was really upset. And when he discovered further that I was interested in these big questions, he was even more upset. And he said, we're going to have a rotten evening because I'm an atheist, I'm a reductionist, and I'm not interested. And we're going to have a horrible time, which is not the best way to start a dinner. So I've told this story many times because I find it illustrates this best of all. So forgive me if you've heard it before. So I said, you're a reductionist. I take it you're an ontological reductionist. You believe everything can be reduced to physics and chemistry. He said, that's right. So I picked up the menu from the table and I said, let's do an experiment. He said, what, here? I said, yes, let's have a look at this. And it said roast, R-O-A-S-T, chicken. So he said, what's the problem? Well, I said, you're a reductionist. Everything can be explained in terms of physics and chemistry. He said, that's right. So I said, explain to me the semiotics of the letters R-O-A-S-T, the way they carry meaning, in terms of the physics and chemistry of the paper and ink. And his wife was sitting beside him, and rather too loudly she said, get out of that if you can. But he didn't try. His answer was stunning. He said this, John, for 40 years I've gone into my laboratory thinking this could be done. And many brilliant people still think it can be done, ladies and gentlemen. But he says it can't be done. And I said, half a minute. I started to play devil's advocate. Physics and chemistry have only been going for 500 years or so. Oh no, he said, it can't be done. It needs the input of an intelligence. And it's not an intelligence of the gaps either. It's that the nature of the thing being studied demands an intelligent input. And he was amazed that I could come up with such an idea. He said, where did you get that idea? I said, I confess, I got it from a Nobel Prize winner. Oh, he said, that's a relief. But this is very important, ladies and gentlemen. Reductionism of the methodological kind, and indeed an ontological kind, is very important in the natural sciences. But there's one area, massive area, where it doesn't work. And that's where you've got semiotics and meaning. You infer upwards. The moment you see a word, you infer upwards to an intelligence, no matter how many and how automatic and how pre-programmed are the processes that get that word before your eyes. And it only takes 5 letters of roast chicken. Now here's the rub. You and I...
Come on, bro. I'm freaking hitting them.
...see the discovery of the longest word in existence. It's the human genome. 3.5 billion letters in exactly the right order in a 4-letter chemical alphabet. The very same people I discover that immediately infer intelligence from 4 or 5 letters of their own name or a word can look at the human genome and say, when you ask them its origin, chance and necessity. What? Chance and the laws of nature? Something very strange is going on. Now, I haven't time to argue with you why I think theoretical computer science supports my conclusion that you do not get word, meaningful word, by unguided natural processes. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, it's not simply the miracles of Jesus that are evidence of the supernatural, though they are, and they're very important. It starts much earlier on. As I said to Richard Dawkins, your very rationality is evidence of the supernatural. Because if you provide a causal reason, cause and effect for your rationality, you empty it of meaning on the same basis that many people say to me, you say that because you're an Irishman. That empties it of meaning, as you know. You give a causal explanation, you remove the meaning. Now, I'll close with this and then we'll face the questions. 2 worldviews that we face in Chapel Hill, in Oxford and around the world. One starts with mass energy and it ends up with consciousness and the human mind being derivative. The other starts, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things came to be through Him. That is, Word is primary, information is primary, God is primary, and mass energy are derivative, and your mind and mine are derivative. So there are the 2 possibilities. The first view regards God as a fiction, because God is the end product of this series. The universe has invented us and we have invented God. The other view, which starts with the Word, is that God invented the universe And he is the ultimate reality. And all I can say, ladies and gentlemen, it is both as a scientist and a Christian that it's the word explanation that makes infinitely more sense to me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
If God is real, why is there suffering in the world? The second one is, why do people use something as personal as religion to hurt others? And finally, aren't all religions equal?
Oh, that's some bull crap, bro. Seriously, man.
Well,
Seriously,
ladies and
man.
gentlemen,
Freaking pissed off.
what we're going
I'm pissed
to
off,
do,
man. I've
I
been
have noted these questions,
going
but he's removed
back and
them,
forth,
so I
man.
don't know what they are anymore.
left, right, up, down. ABC.
But before
Sega
I
Genesis
look up the-
password, man.
I want to get
I don't know, what does that
some
sound
idea
like?
of
English?
the questions you've got.
I can't take it, man.
Now,
I
this
can't
is
take
a
it anymore,
Q&A,
man.
and you will rapidly
Can't take
discover
it.
my
I
limitations.
can't take it no more.
Because in a
Okay, that's
Q&A,
pretty
by
good,
definition,
actually, bro.
you
That's
can
like what?
only
Like,
say a little bit of how you
like
would
the
approach
Beatles,
the
right?
question. So what I'm going to
I
ask
play
you
the
to
guit-
do is
I
this.
play the
find in
guitar.
audiences that everybody is interested
I
in other
like,
people's questions.
I like performing live
So
in
keep
front
your
of the
questions
audience.
short and
I
on
like the people
topic.
when they
I'm
scream
not
for
here
me.
to answer questions about healthcare or
I'm a
anything
Beatles
else like
man.
that. I'm here to try to address
Holy
this
crap,
topic.
I just
so
got
what
an
I'm going to
English
invite you
accent
to do is
down.
come up to the microphone,
never even
state your question.
knew how to do an English
I'm going to
accent.
write down a number of questions alternately from the microphone. Take them with those three, and then we'll see where we go from there. So whoever's got a question, just line up here and state your question briefly, and I will write it down. Just remember, the time you take for your question is time taken away from somebody else. Okay, off we go. Don't all rush at once.
Okay.
Okay, just start and slowly and clearly so as we all hear you.
Okay. I read a book about the God part of the brain, stating that part of the mind is dedicated to religion. Some people have a stronger part than others. And an example of this would be somebody who was a God-believing Christian fell, and then after that was unable to believe. What would be your response to that?
Thank you. Okay, over there.
Many theists believe that their sense of morality is derived from their religion, and I've also heard that you can't take the Bible literally, so you have to pick and choose which parts you take as your sense of right and wrong. And my question is, how do you do that? Like, on what basis do you do that? If the basis is subjective, then that means you'd have to derive your sense of right and wrong from somewhere other than the Bible, which means that the Bible really isn't your sense, isn't really where you derive your sense of morality.
Okay, thank you. 3.
Do you believe in a young or a old Earth?
Have you all understood the question?
No, man, that was going to be my exact question.
Do I believe in a young or old Earth? Not quite sure what that's got to do with the topic, but I'll put it down. Next.
Yes. What do you say to many scholars who believe that certain Christian doctrines, such as bodily resurrection and the Last Judgment, were taken more or less wholesale from other religions like Zoroastrianism?
This relates back to the New Old.
Hey, just hang on a minute. Okay.
To your comment about the New Earth, Old Earth question, it was the same one, but to, I guess, point out like how, at least I took it as on topic. You were talking about how science and religion don't have to be diametrically opposed, but I was wondering if you do take the New and Old Testament as literal, do you believe that the Earth is approximately 6,000 years old? And if so, how do you reconcile that with all the evidence against that?
Next.
Why Christianity?
Okay. Well, that was short. Anything else?
How do you rationalize evolution within the context of your faith?
How do I rationalize it? Do you think I do? Okay.
This one has to do with your field of mathematics. As created beings in the likeness of God, giving the ability to create also, is mathematics just observable, or do we have the opportunity to create new mathematics?
Thank you. Well, that'll have to do, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. How very interesting. So we'll take the last one first, since I'm a mathematician. It's a very interesting question. People have puzzled about it for centuries, of course. Is mathematics discovered or is it created? And probably because I'm an Irishman, I think both, actually. Because God himself has clearly the designer of the regularities in the universe. We really are discovering something out there. You notice that very few scientists are postmodern in their science. They may be postmodern in their morality, but they're not postmodern in their science. They believe mostly in a kind of critical realism.
I gotta get out of here, dude.
To the truth, but never
last
getting
game,
quite
last
to
game.
it. And staggering things have been found out. The Higgs boson and all the elementary particles and all of that kind of stuff seems to be out there. So we're discovering things. But human beings are made in the image of God. And God invented a universe. And so do we. Some of the most exciting bits of literature are human inventions. Indeed, a lot of literature is like that. And I had the good fortune, when I was at Cambridge, that the Mathematics Institute was just across the road from the Institute of English Language. And there was a man called C.S. Lewis still lecturing there. So I sneaked out when mathematics got boring and went to listen to Lewis. And I'm very thankful for that, because he educated my imagination. And I'm sure there are many people here interested in creative writing and the media and so on. This is a marvelous gift of God to be able to create. Now, mathematics is interesting because some of it is directly geared to, let's find the mathematics that gears into the what we call the real world. But people like me actually work in two kinds of worlds, because we are trying to work out the consequences, the theoretical consequences of a set of axioms, whether or not they have any relevance in the real world. So it is in a way highly creative, but it has to be logically coherent. And of course that's where it differs greatly from imaginative literature. So I think one of the wonderful things, indeed I would regard it as an evidence of God's existence, is the fact that we can do science, we can do arts, we can do literature. And that is one of the most exciting things and motivating things I find. God is not dull and boring, you know. He invented all the colors, and we find it very difficult to invent new ones. So that'll have to be enough for that question. Now, the God part of the brain dedicated to religion. Now, this comes up again and again, but it seems to me, and I haven't recently investigated it, that it's dying a bit of a death, because it is seen that many parts of the brain's interconnections are bewildering in their complexity. And this notion that one bit of the brain deals with one thing is just not true. In fact, what I said to you at the beginning of my lecture needs serious qualification, which I didn't give it. And that is, although there are differences between the left hand and the right hand side of the brain, both sides of the brain can do almost anything. And so this notion of identifying a God part with that particular part is a very questionable activity. But the questioner went on a bit and said that when parts of some people's brain get damaged, their behavior can change, and indeed their beliefs can change. And that is absolutely true. Sometimes, sadly, old people who've lived virtually blameless lives, something happens, the brain dries out or loses too many neurons, and they start to behave like children. Now, we need to be very careful here. And this is where I think the Christian faith is utterly glorious. Some people might look at those old people and say, what a pity, they used to be such nice people, but now they seem to have lost everything. Be careful, it just could be that there is damage physically affecting their neurophysiology. You know, if you give me a brand new Cadillac to drive, And watch me going along the road. You say, oh, he must be a very good driver. Whereas I see you in your 50-year-old VW Beetle, and it's careering around across the road, and I say, rotten driver. It may not be you, it may be the car. And one of the marvelous doctrines of Christianity is this, that if we trust Christ and build up our character and our beliefs and our trust in him, he promises not to lose it. Because death will occur anyway and will destroy us. But before we get to death, physically that is, we may exhibit all kinds of bizarre trends that would lead other people to think, gosh, that was a terrific Christian, or that was a tremendous atheist, and they lost their faith in both directions. But it may not be so, you see. It may simply be that now the degeneration of the body is causing neurophysiological changes that are causing mental changes. Now, of course, atheism has no hope for such people, because by definition, death is
I think
the
I
end.
got it.
But the wonderful thing about
Last
the Christian
one,
faith
baby.
is, as Jesus said, when he saw a brother and sister
there we
in
go.
a graveyard centuries ago, and the sister was weeping, and he said to her, your brother will rise again.
Gotcha.
You have
Gotcha.
a relationship that was special to you. That will go on into the world to come. Atheism has nothing
needed one.
but that to offer us, ladies and gentlemen. And that brings me neatly to the question about the resurrection. Was it taken from other religions? No. And you can prove that from the Old Testament. There are myths about God's dying and rising again. But the special thing about resurrection is that's what it is. In Greek, anastasis, standing up again. When Paul, the Christian apostle, went to Athens, he was invited to speak to the philosopher's court, the Areopagus. And they listened to him very politely until he started talking about Jesus and the resurrection, and a ripple of laughter went round the court, which proves that they didn't accept resurrection. What they did accept, at least the Platonists, was survival of the soul. But that laughter is evidence that what Paul was preaching was something that none of them believed, was that a body put in the grave literally rose again. Now, saying there are analogies between God's dying and rising and Christ rising from the dead doesn't at all affect the point that I come to next. And that is, I believe in the resurrection because I think there's historical evidence for it. I don't see any historical evidence for those other claims, which are largely and admittedly part of mythology. But the resurrection, of course, is the central evidence for the deity of Christ. Now, how do I rationalize evolution within my faith? Do I believe in a young or old earth? Is the Bible literal? Now, we need to deal with some very simple things first, ladies and gentlemen. No one takes the Bible literally. Can I prove that to you? Jesus said, I am the door. What was he made of? Stone, metal, plastic? That's a metaphor. You see, the word literal is something we need to investigate. We use it without thinking. People constantly ask me, do you take the Bible literally? I say, what exactly do you mean? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's talking about the literal earth, base level, isn't it? And of course, we take, the way we read language is first of all to take it at face value, but the face value may not be literalistic. Let me explain that to you. Jesus said, I am the door. How do you know he's not a door made of steel? Actually, it's because you know a bit of science. You know something about the real world. You know that's a metaphor, but watch it. That doesn't mean it isn't real. And it doesn't mean it isn't literal. Jesus is a real door. Literal if you like, but at the next level up. That is, he is a real doorway into a real experience of God. I'd stake my life on that. Do you see the point I'm making? That this word literal is totally misleading. You know, sometimes when people say to me, do you take the Bible literally? I say to them, Israel was a land flowing with milk and honey. So, when the Israelites came into the land, they met a great sticky ball of milk and honey coming crashing down the main street. Oh, no, you don't take it literally. You take it spiritually, don't you? Israel was a land full of the milk of the Word and the honey of the Holy Spirit. You don't take it like that either. Israel was a land, literal. The milk and honey were literal. The metaphor is flowing. But it's describing a real situation, that this was a rich culture, agriculture, with lots of milk, lots of honey, lots of health. You see the point? Ladies and gentlemen, there is a great danger in treating the Bible as less than a book and imposing idiotic restraints on it that we'd never impose on any other piece of literature. So that's the first point. Point number 2 is this. I'm not, do I believe in a young or old earth? What does it matter whether I do or not? Suppose I say, I believe in a young earth, and you'll go away and say, Professor Lennox believes in the young earth, you know. And some of you will think that's marvelous, and some of you will think he's a consummate idiot. Because, ladies and gentlemen, there is a sense in which what I believe is not important. Why I believe it is very important. Now, the question before us, of course, is based on interpretations of the Bible. Do you know where they came from? The young earth view? My hometown in Ireland. I shouldn't have confessed that, should I? Archbishop Usher. Well, let me give just one little step in this direction, and then I'll have to do a bit of shameless advertising. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's what Scripture says. I believe it. Ladies and gentlemen, let me make it absolutely clear. I am fully convinced of the inspiration and authority of Scripture. I take it very seriously. That is why I read it very carefully. You get then a sequence of days. If you notice those days, every one of them, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, begins with the phrase, and God said. You would expect, since it is a sequence, that the first would begin with the phrase, and God said. And you notice that that phrase first comes in verse 3. The Bible does not start with the words, and God said, let there be a heavens and earth. Have you noticed that? The Bible starts with the words, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. It then gives you a sequence of days. And if you ask any Hebrew scholar, he will tell you, or she will tell you, that the tense changes from verse 3 on to indicate that the opening statement is in a sense independent and prior to the sequence of days. You see, we read it and we jump to the assumption, whatever we believe about the days, that the beginning was on day 1. Scripture doesn't say it. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. It gives you a sequence of days, and as I said, the tenses indicate that the beginning is before the sequence of days. How long before? I haven't a notion. So if the Bible's not dogmatic, I'm not going to believe it. So now I come back to your question. Do I think the earth is old? Well, I think the evidence that as we have it is pretty overwhelmingly convincing that it's old. It doesn't affect a single thing in Scripture, as far as I can see. That's how I'd start. How would I finish? Well, I've written a little book because I get asked this question endlessly. It was advertised at the beginning, so allow me to advertise it again. If you want to follow this up, and it is a really serious question for many people, because they want to take the Bible seriously, they want to take science seriously.
I gotta go, dude.
Well, my
What
little
am I
book is
doing?
called 7 Days That Divide the World. And you might like to look